family as clients. So a client with a low level of intellectual stability, his level of functioning is too high for him to qualify for developmental services. So it's borderline intellectual stability with high adaptive skills would not qualify for developmental services. He is financially capable of making treatment decisions making treatment decisions and financial decisions for himself, but has a history of making poor choices around how he spends his money. He regularly visits his elderly mother in a nursing home. He can be very pushy when demanding money from his mother, and he often takes most of his mother's money, which she does hand over, although staff question her understanding of the amount she's actually providing to the individual. The staff of long-term care have indicated there's nothing they can do. What are the legal and ethical considerations at play here, and how can we protect both parties involved?
Some things that jump out legally are first focusing on the client himself. Why is this happening? If his money is being managed by the PGT and he's feeling the need to demand money from his mom, is that because the communication with the PGT has been less than ideal, and so he's not, he's financially capable of making great decisions. So I think for both of these individuals, we would want to think about financial capacity and whether they are, either of them are able to manage their own finances. It is possible to arrange capacity assessments for someone in the community, although as Sandy has pointed out, there are some limitations to that, and it is a service which often comes with a cost, although for low income people there is an ability to apply to the PGT if it's a really extreme financial situation for some relief from that. So that would be a first step to think about in order to see if we can get this money under control on both sides, from the client and or from in order to make sure that they're both getting what they need and not spending their money frivolously or being financially abused. The other thing that comes to mind immediately when I think about Mom's situation, if for some reason a financial capacity assessment she's refusing or there's no means, is whether she's at risk of serious adverse effects and potentially incapable. And I think Sandy can speak to whether this would be an appropriate situation, but if in fact Mom is being taken advantage of and is potentially incapable, then a consideration of whether the investigations unit of the PGT needs to get involved.
I can speak a little bit to that. First of all, I just want to clarify. So if somebody wants to request their own capacity assessment, then there may be funding available through the Capacity Assessment Office, which is housed within the PGT, but it's not part of the PGT. But it actually has to be the person, the alleged incapable person requesting their own. If I wanted to request a capacity assessment for my mother, I wouldn't be eligible for the funding because it would be me as the requester. So, and it's basically, if you're on like ODSP or very limited like old age security, then generally you would qualify. In terms of, for somebody who's living in a long-term care facility, when we look at like going to court for guardianship, we have to have incapacity, evidence of incapacity, and evidence of risk of serious adverse effects. When someone's in a long-term care facility, that risk is alleviated a lot by the fact that they can't get evicted, they're being fed, they have access to the things that keep them safe. Where we would start to look at maybe we do have a role, and where there may be risk is whether or not, maybe they aren't getting foot care and they're diabetic, or they're, wearing the clothing of, deceased residents if they haven't had any new clothing, or they haven't been getting their personal needs allowance, they're not getting a haircut, they're not getting that stuff done. So that might be, if we had information about that, then that might build a better case about risk to her. Otherwise, we may not have enough evidence to go to court to ask a judge to appoint us because there wouldn't be enough evidence of risk there. I also, in this scenario, I do kind of question where she's coming up with, where she's getting cash because, most people in a long-term care facility aren't accessing their bank unless he would be using the bank card. I don't know, but there are other options that people can do. So say he is accessing her money, then somebody could actually call her bank if they have like a long-term care facility, can call the bank and say, hey, we're concerned. This is the only money that should be going out of her account, paying for the long-term care facility and a little bit of money here and there. If you see somebody using a bank card, can you monitor the account? And they can put restrictions on the account. They can take back debit cards, cancel debit cards. They can freeze accounts. So there's other less intrusive options that might resolve it. So that's sort of where our office would maybe able to.
These types of cases are morally very distressing in many instances. Let's assume that she has the capacity and she's acquiescing to being taken advantage of financially by her son. Does she have a right to let her son empty her bank accounts if she has the capacity to do that? Yes. Now, how do you as carers feel about that? And that then becomes the rub. So if, and the inclination might be, I need to protect this lady, she's being taken advantage of by her son. She knows she's being taken advantage of and she's on board with being taken advantage of. But I really feel that's a horrible, terrible thing. It has to stop. And I'm going to do something to stop it. Right? Because it's not right. And that's where I think we run into our values as professionals, our obligations as professionals, our values as human people, and our obligations as human people when we see another in a situation that we find unacceptable or problematic. When do we intervene? Why do we intervene? How do we intervene? Or do we allow it? A separate case is very similar in many ways, although it's about physical abuses. 30 years ago, I can remember a case where an elderly person was brought into the emergency room and she had obvious signs of bruising. And the team was concerned and they asked, what's going on? And she said, well, my son's a little rough when he works with me. And the nurses were obviously, now they're all dead, so I'm not giving any information, right? But the nurses were obviously distressed about this, and we've got to do something, we've got to do something. Well, the woman had capacity, and they engaged a conversation around, that looks like your son's a little more than rough with you. Well, over time, talking, yeah, he is a little more than rough with me, but don't say anything to anybody. Well, what do you mean don't say anything to anybody? Listen, the only thing I have in my life is my dog, and my son told me that if I say anything to anybody, he's going to take my dog away, and I couldn't live without my dog. So you're going to say something and have her dog taken away from her and have her put in an institution? She has the capacity to know. Now, she's vulnerable. Do we need to protect her? Probably, but how? Do we destroy her life, even though it's not a good life from our point of view, in order to protect her from her son, who's doing things that are illegal, on the one hand, and also inappropriate? How do you address dealing with that in this situation? If we address this, and the son never gets to visit his mother again, and his mother's only joy in life is having the son come and ask her for money, what have we done to long? So the context really can impact how we think about approaching these types of situations.